Hi and welcome to another Catholic Lives Ireland, brought to you from here, the Convent of the Sisters of Mercy in Downpatrick, County Down, Ireland, just a stone's throw away from the traditional resting place of St Patrick himself. And our Catholic Life from Ireland today is Cathy Sinnott. Good to have you here, Cathy.
Thank you, David.
You are a former member of the European Parliament, disability rights campaigner and mother of 9. Where in Ireland is it you live?
I live down in Cork, near
Okay.
the airport. Yeah.
But from hearing that accent, I think one thing that will quickly become apparent to people, I'm hearing American there.
That's right. I was born in Chicago and always lived around Illinois and Indiana, with a sojourn to Michigan and California at some point.
So tell us what brought you from America to Ireland, given that most people's story is going the other way.
Well, it kind of is a circle because my grandfather was born and raised only a few miles from here.
Is that right?
Yeah, and left for the States when he was about 19 or 20. So my father was raised very much as Irish. My mother would have come partly from an Irish background as well. And we also would all have been Irish citizens as well. But I grew up in the US, big family. I was the 5th of 14 children.
Wow.
Very Catholic family and very American Catholic family. I mean, the faith was very much lived. I mean, anything that was needed, the novena was, we did a novena, the Infant of Prague and Our Lady. But it was fun as well. We lived the liturgical year so that for children in a big house of children, that meant special treats on different days. And, for the Feast of Holy Innocents, everything would be red and white. So you'd have sort of strawberries, even though it was winter, and you'd have vanilla ice cream. And you just did things. You taught the faith through, the treats you had, the costumes you wore, the games you played. And so I had a huge love of being a Catholic. I just thought it was really lucky to be Catholic. But I came over, I went to college. Actually, I had great education. I had Dominicans in Marion High School in Chicago Heights. And they gave us such a sense that they absolutely loved teaching us, absolutely, loved their subject, loved the faith. And apparently the high school is still going strong. And eventually went to St. Mary's of the Woods in Terre Haute and spent 2 years there. And it was an interesting time because the first year was very much what I came for. It was very good scholastics. I did a lot of history. I loved history and literature. I would have studied Chinese history, Jewish history, world history, all sorts of things. The second year the college went through, and this would have been 1969-70, the college went through what was called a self-study. And it was a crazy year. It was just a crazy year, just in that no one really knew what they were doing because we were all studying ourselves. And, in the beginning of the year, the nuns were in habits, and by the second half of the year, the convent seemed to be split between the habits and the pink outfits with the jewelry, and it just was kind of a crazy year. And I think I sort of decided to head over to Ireland. I was an Irish citizen, to head over, and maybe I had an image that Ireland knew what they were. The situation I was in, nobody knew what they were. It was very much the experimental thing. I also So I applied to University College Dublin, UCD, and headed over and attended in 1970. So I arrived in 1970 and never went home.
And you got married in Ireland?
I did. I got married in 1971. I married a musician who was in a just starting band called Horselips, which Irish people would know. A really fine musician, Declan Sinnott. And really probably one of Ireland's finest contemporary musicians.
And well, you're known for many things in Ireland. One of them, disability rights campaigning for, and it was the birth of your third son that led to that departure in your life. That's
right. You know, when I had two, a boy and a girl, and in 1977, my third, Jamie, was born. And the funny thing is, before Jamie was born, we were in Spain. We were visiting, doing a pilgrimage to Our Lady of the Pillar, my husband was playing for American bases in Spain.
And that's where, that's Zaragoza?
Zaragoza,
Right.
yeah. And, you know, I'm not one of these people, like, my prayer life is pretty straightforward, you know. I say the rosary and I say my prayers, but, you know, I don't have mystical experiences or hear voices or do anything like that. But this was the one time in my life I did. I was praying for all the people who had said, look, when you're in Zaragoza, pray for me. I had gone through the whole list, and I got to my own family and went down, you know, the different children. My husband came to the last one, and I prayed for a happy, healthy baby. I was 4 months pregnant, I think, at the time. And I just heard this beautiful voice, and it just said, this will not be. And I remember turning around to see who had whispered that to me. And there were just two elderly, you know, all in black, you know, Spanish widows praying, and nobody there. And so I thought, okay. And but when he was born, he was perfectly healthy, no problems. And I remember thinking, you know, as soon as I held him, I remember thinking, he's fine, great. And 4 months later, when he got his first immunization, he just lost everything. He just, he must have had an encephalitis. He just screamed, he pushed at his head, lost all of the development he'd had to that time. And that pretty much started his life as a person who then later on got the diagnosis of profound autism, mild cerebral palsy, he has epilepsy, he doesn't speak, etc. The experience I discovered in Ireland is that my son, because he was considered severe and profound, was not entitled to services. And so within 5 years, I had started my first disability group and went down from there. And I really always, you know, I could see how precious my son was. I understood that. I understood the love we had for him and that he had a very important place in this world and job to do. And I couldn't understand how they couldn't see that. And I began to band other parents together. And for me, it was always about the dignity of the person. And it became increasingly, as the debate in Ireland around a pro-life amendment in the early 80s, etc., it also, I began to realize that even from a pro-life point of view, the disabled were on the front line. And that, you know, if you really needed to fight for the services they needed. I mean, if you could discard them for education, you know, how soon could you discard them for life? So it was always a very integrated fight for me. And it's still going on to this day. I mean, I'm still very involved. I'm very much volunteering all the time with disability issues. I'm just back from Brussels again on disability issues. And it's not going to go away.
And you fought the Irish government to the highest levels, and you won.
That's right. That's right. I had a wonderful legal team. I went to the High Court with the refusal to give education to my son, but you know, my case was never just for my son. You know, I suppose being one of 14, I have a group mentality. I always understand that you always have to do it for everybody. You know, nobody gets left behind. So even though the state wanted to cut deals with me, that my son would get services, we just couldn't go there. You know, we had to win the principle of it so that it would help everyone. And the upshot is that certainly the right to education was acknowledged. There had been a previous case as well that had been very important in this. And my son was educated as well. And he still is. He's the only adult in the country still receiving primary education, and he has gone in the last 8 years from being in a wheelchair to he can walk about 2 kilometers. He makes simple decisions. He has simple ways of communicating now. He's very happy, and he's still learning. Whereas he could really do nothing and was quite miserable 8 years ago. So the education's made a huge difference to him.
And he's doing okay now?
He's doing okay, and he's still at home. He's still working in a home program. He's 32, and he's a great fella.
And was that your first entry into the world of campaigning, the world of politics?
Well, it was and it wasn't. You know, when I was in the States, I would have, you know, done a few marches, civil rights marches. I was very interested in the idea of civil rights. And it again touches a little thing. My grandfather, who was born very near here, was Cook County Commissioner of Chicago when Chicago was quite corrupt. He was the county was, he was the commissioner of the county that encased Chicago. And in fact, in the old newspaper clippings, he still called Peter Kelly the honest politician. But he was the first one to hire black employees into the county. So he had broken the race barrier back in the 1930s in Cook County. So I think I was very conscious of that and did work on that. But by the time I left the States, really Roe v. Wade didn't come till 1973. So I had already left at that stage.
So do you see the struggle for disability rights and the pro-life struggle as the successor of the civil rights movement in the States?
They're completely combined. You know, they're the same thing. And in fact, when you look at something like the Dred Scott decision, where it was decided that black people were just property, that they weren't really human beings, well, that's the same thing that happens now to the embryo, to the unborn child, and very much increasingly in Europe is happening to people with disabilities and elderly people and terminally ill people as euthanasia is beginning to come. Certainly, I remember a study while I was an MEP, a study of infant deaths in the Netherlands and another one of infant deaths in Belgium. And the study concluded that half of infant deaths before a year had been either active or passive euthanasia. And mostly because either they were low birth weight, in danger of becoming disabled, or disabled.
And why do you feel then so many of those people who you campaigned with for civil rights in the United States haven't continued their activism into the pro-life cause? In fact, very often, quite the opposite.
Yes, well, there's kind of a split there in their reasoning. You know, I haven't been in the States that much, but even to bring it to Europe, so many people who are very active or very supportive of disability rights, then particularly I think in the parliament, the socialists, they would, you know, be very supportive of disability rights. And yet they don't go there when it comes to the right of a preborn Down syndrome baby or a preborn baby with a condition. They see that as fine, you know. In fact, the big fight by the socialists not to lower abortion ages because otherwise we won't be able to spot the Down syndrome babies. You know, how come they can't see that if everyone, you know, they'll use terms like everyone has a right to, you know, to life, to health services, to all these things, how come they can't see that by restricting the unborn and the newly born disabled is you know, that's a contradiction to what they're claiming.
Well, Kathy, stay with us and join us again in a few moments for some more from Kathy Sinnott and Catholic Lives Ireland. Thank you, Kathy. Hi, welcome back to Catholic Lives Ireland. We're here in Downpatrick, County Down in Ireland with Kathy Sinnott, former member of the European Parliament and mother of 9 as well. And that adventure in the European Parliament, I suppose, begins for you 2004. Right. You're elected to the European Parliament, which sits, as the parliamentary wing of the European Union, sits in Strasbourg and Brussels, is that right?
Brussels and Strasbourg, yeah.
And how did you find being a Catholic in politics, in Parliament?
Great. I found it great, but because I was also an independent politically, so I was a free agent. My loyalty was just to my constituents and to my principles, and I didn't have to worry about parties, anything else, and that is a wonderful way to have it. In fact, all 5 years that I was there, I just felt, you know, every day had such opportunities because I love serving people. And I'd had so much frustration over the years with different campaigns in disability, but not just in disability. And you could be very proactive there, you know, push things forward. But the life issues were hugely important there, and religious freedoms issues. You know, there are very strong currents in the Parliament groups that on the separation of church and state type groups, which really almost seemed to be groups just obsessed with the Catholic Church and removing it from all visibility in life. There were very strong currents as well towards, I mean, almost every month we had votes where this term was stuck in, sexual and reproductive rights, you know, which is the right to abortion. So we were forever having to, you know, kind of minutely go through voting, you know, everything that was coming up, looking for this term to see where it was snuck in, because it would be snuck in everything. And then we had very, very big campaigns around the embryo, the right to experiment, to create and destroy embryos. These were campaigns, and that were, some of them took up to a year with different directives, medical directives, etc. So being free, being Catholic, so that I had principles that I knew where I stood. I never had to wonder, oh, well, you know, should we weigh this up? No, I knew that every human life, the embryo, the unborn life, the old life, the vulnerable lives, were all very, very important. So I didn't lose time with any of that, and I could be very straightforward about it.
And in the midst of those battles, how do you sustain yourself, and particularly in terms of prayer?
Oh, you have to pray. You have to pray. I remember one day I was sitting at a meeting and I was making all these little lines because I was actually saying a rosary. But so I was making a little line every time I said a Hail Mary. And another MEP leaned over and said, "What's that?" And I said, "I have a friend with cancer and they're having a surgery." So he said, "Well, yeah, so," and I said, "That's the rosary." And he's like, "Oh." But you just have to pray because places like the Parliament are just such an artificial world. You need a lot of grace to be there. You need you need protection. So I also used to ask people to pray for me. You know, anybody that sort of came up to me, I'd be like, "And will you pray for me?" So I had, you know, hundreds and people committed to praying for me. But it's absolutely essential to be effective, to not lose your way, not to sell out, and to serve. Another thing that was really important was to pray for your constituents. I was asked to say a few words at a prayer breakfast, you know, these annual prayer breakfasts. And I just talked about our work. And in the end, I actually said the prayer that I say every time I left Brussels, and it had this and that, and take care of this and do this and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, as much as we're always supposed to be doing prayers of adoration, thanksgiving, mine are almost always a list of please this and do this, and, you know, because I'm a mom. And but it was all about constituents. And then I was saying, and please take care of my whole constituency, and please give everybody jobs, and don't blah, blah, blah. And at the end, so many MEPs, they came up to me and said, "We never thought about praying for our people before." And I said, "Well, how do you serve them? How can you love them? You got to pray for them." And so I think it's absolutely essential.
So obviously you've an incredible situation where you're at the heart of the European Union for 5 years, observe it at close quarters. And I know you've said before, Kathy, that you will have concerns about the European Union's view of Catholicism and traditional Christianity. How does it work? Who initiates legislation and ideas
Everything.
in the European
Union? The Commission is everything.
And the Commission are who?
The Commission is a body of civil servants, about 20,000 strong, led by a commissioner, one commissioner from every country.
Who are elected or appointed?
They're appointed. There is no election. So the most powerful body in Europe is not elected in any way. But they really set the agenda, and my experience is the Commission gets what it wants. You know, the Parliament was able to modify things. The Council certainly, particularly France and Germany, the biggest countries, they set the agenda. But really, the Commission is the power. The agenda is very, very secular. And for instance, one of the latest directives that we passed before I left, or that was going through the Parliament, it's stuck in the Council now, is called anti-discrimination. And they have no discrimination on the basis of religion. But when you really examine how that will play out, it will be the right not to have religion, not the freedom of religion, like, for instance, the right not to ever see a cross, so they must be taken down from all hospitals, the right to, not have a Christmas crib, the getting religion out of schools.
So in terms of taking that on, do you believe that the European Union can be reformed, or that countries like Ireland or the United Kingdom should withdraw?
Well, I think we have to look. Pope Benedict is saying it all the time. He's saying a united Europe will only work based on Christ. That doesn't mean everyone has to be Christian, because when you base it on Christ, you have true religious freedom for everyone. But it is the only thing that's going to work, because then we actually have that mutual understanding of each other's best welfare. We have principles like real solidarity, real subsidiarity, that the citizen becomes very important and is a decision maker, etc. When you take the Catholic social principles, it is a situation that can work. It won't work the way it is, because the way Europe is now, it can only work. It can only continue as power migrates further and further up, further and further away from citizens as it gets bigger and bigger. And how long that can last, how long citizens will put up with that, I don't know.
So to move from Cathy Sinnott, the Catholic and the campaigner, to Cathy Sinnott, the Catholic and the mother of 9, and I know sadly that you recently lost a son drowned in a swimming accident in the US.
That's right. Well, I just take you back a little further. While I was an MEP, my sister died. So our family expanded with her children. She had 7 children. Now some were already grown up, but our household expanded, certainly with 5 of them. But just more recently, my son Kevin, who was attending Southern Catholic College, which I think has been featured on EWTN, died in a swimming across the lake. And he was a great kid, really someone who thought a lot. He was a philosophy student, someone who had not done very well in school as a child, but once he left Ireland, just blossomed and discovered real, very, very significant intellect and talents. And also faith. He said to me the first time he came home, having left Ireland, he was saying to me, "How come you never told me the Mass was so important? The faith is so interesting." And he said, though, I wouldn't have the faith if I had stayed in Ireland, which is a kind of very sad. But it's made me really think since Kevin's death. Kevin died having just recently gone to confession. He did adoration. He said the rosary. These were things that, so many young people in Ireland have walked away from. And he did that because of the kind of college he went to. He actually got to learn what the faith was. And it really has set me on a kind of campaign to promote the idea of a Catholic college here. Even if it's small, we're a small country. If we could graduate 40 or 50 people who understood, like my son Kevin, what the faith really was and who could make a commitment to the faith, we would leaven the faith in Ireland very quickly. We're only 4 million people.
So a Catholic college or a Catholic university for Ireland, what else is on the to-do list in the next few years for Cathy Sinnott?
Well, I'm doing a lot of disability work still. I've also been doing a lot of, in the media, I'm called on to step out and sort of give the other side for the embryo, usually against the head of an IVF clinic or something. And then euthanasia is a growing thing. And it was an issue that I had to deal with in Brussels, but which hadn't come to Ireland yet, and now is beginning to come to Ireland. And it's an issue I know. I mean, I had my own experience when my son Jamie, who with the disability, was at his lowest point. He weighed 65 pounds. He was 5'5". He really was on the way out. And I was trying to get medical help for him, and consultants said to me 3 times, if we don't get him on a feeding program, you'll lose him. And 20 minutes later came with his team and said, we've decided not to put him on a feeding program. We've decided his quality of life. This was in a children's hospital in Dublin. that his quality of life is poor. You know, I got him out of there, brought him home, got him to a different consultant, and today he's doing great. But it really brought me up very close that even if we're not talking about euthanasia in this country, there is an undercurrent. And so I am really beginning to become very involved in the euthanasia, in opposing euthanasia, but really in the context of trying to help people understand how absolutely precious every human person is, no matter what their condition is. But also, and this is an insight my own son's death has really given me, how important that stage of life that we call death is. How it's a very beautiful stage of life, and it shouldn't be shortened. It shouldn't be, we shouldn't be afraid of it either. It's just probably one of the richest times in our life. And so I've become very interested in helping people understand that and maybe not be so afraid of it. And then I pray a lot more. You know, I think since Kevin's died, I've such an urgency about praying, I think, well, he could be in purgatory. You know, he might need me right now. And so all day I get this nudge, come on, you haven't prayed for a while. And I also ask him for help, So he's joined St. Joseph and Our Lady with, my constant helpers. So I think that's what I'm doing now. And it's pretty busy.
Kathy Sinnott, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us. Do join us again next time for another Catholic Life from Ireland. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks.
Thank you.